I've done 2 of these talks in the last year and a half or so. Has anyone been to? John, I know you have. So some of it will be the same. The one on the internet was done for VFR stuff, like the private issues, and this one is geared towards the instrument rating. So, and what it is, my name's Andy Munnis, by the way, for those of you who don't know me. I know most of you, so. And what it is notice doing check rides that you start seeing the same issues come up over and over and over again. So instead of beating my head against the wall and your heads too as you come in for check rides, I thought, well, why not just get together once a year or so and get that information out there and start talking about some of these common errors that I'm seeing on check rides. And so that's what this is about. So it's not meant to do a couple things, though. It's not meant to be all-inclusive. So in other words, if you came here for instrument rating in a can in an hour and a half, that's not what you're going to get. What you're going to get is, like I said, hot topics that are getting missed on a lot of instrument check rides out there. So please don't think that it's all-inclusive. Please don't think that just by being here, you're getting all the information you need to be an instrument pilot. That's not what it's intended to do. Another thing it's not intended to do is supplant anything that your CFII has taught you or is teaching you. I'm not trying to take the place of that person. What I am doing, though, is just coming in my role as a DPE here in Denver and letting you know, hey, these are the things that I see a lot of people missing out there. A couple other things that I'll do is talk about just some basic check ride taking principles that again, I see a lot of people messing up and that can make your check rides go smoother. I know a lot of you, or most of you, are probably here on a career track. So once you make that decision to be a professional pilot for the rest of your career, welcome to check rides for the next 40 or 50 years or so. It's just a part of what we do. You're going to be taking them every year for the rest of your career. So you might as well start getting good at taking them now. We'll talk a little bit about expectations on the check ride and things of that nature. So again, just want to make sure everybody understands this is common errors I see on the instrument check ride, and it's more geared towards the oral too. I should mention that. We'll talk about about a few flight-related issues, but it's more for the oral. So we'll start off, we'll talk about some general topics like PTS and stuff, and then we'll go into the instrument rating, technical areas, and then at the end I'll open it up for questions. So if you absolutely have a burning question as we go along, I guess you could go ahead and ask. But and I'll be using the board and putting up some good gouge that I've come across and developed over the years that might help you out in some of these technical topics. So, all right, first thing I want to talk about is DPE, the PTS. If you haven't read it, by the time you get to your check ride, you're way behind the power curve. These are open book exams, they really are, because you've got the PTS and it tells you exactly what is expected of you on the check ride. I see a lot of people forgetting items that they're supposed to bring to the check ride. Use the applicant's checklist at the beginning of it. If you can mark off all those little boxes on the particular items you're supposed to bring to the check ride, you'll have everything you need. If you've talked to me on a phone and scheduled a check ride in the last 4 years, you know that I will talk to you about special emphasis items before you ever even show up to the check ride. In the introductory part of the PTS, sort of the first half of it, it's a very small section in there, about a half a page or so, but it is entitled Special Emphasis Items. And as you might have guessed, the FAA wants us to pay particular attention to these areas and their safety of flight issues. Things like collision avoidance, runway incursion avoidance, CRM topics, or cockpit resource management, single pilot resource management. Look in your particular PTS, or here we're talking about the instrument rating PTS, and you'll see that they're in there. And really what you want to do is go through those and make sure that you can speak intelligently about those topics, because we're going to talk about them on the check ride for sure. And I bring it up because land and hold short operations are in there. Basically, if I make contact with you doing a check ride, we're going to talk about land and hold short. And that might be a topic that some people think, well, why would I get that on an instrument check ride? Well, you can land and hold shorts basically on an IFR flight plan too, you know. Not on an IFR day, but on the flight plan you can. So we're going to talk about those special emphasis items. The standards in the PTS, I don't think anybody's really asking you to memorize exactly, you know, each particular maneuver and the headings and altitudes. But what we do want to make sure you do is that you're familiar with them, because you're responsible for the information in that book on your check ride. If you turn to me as the examiner and we're doing, say, a ground reference maneuver and ask me, well, how high would you like me to be above the ground? I've gotten that question on check rides before. I'm going to look at you and ask you what the PTS says. So, you know, it's just plain and simple. So you are responsible for that information. So do with that what you will. And final topic on that PTS that is take personal responsibility for your check ride. And what I mean by that is, sure, your CFI or your double I or your MEI is responsible to make sure that you meet the standards and you know the information, but you can certainly open up that PTS, go to FAA.gov and just type in practical test standards, and it's right there for free. You can certainly open that up and read it yourself and just mentally go through it and ask yourself if you're studied up on each particular topic that you come upon. If you can answer yes, you're going to do pretty good on your check ride. All right. How I test. Just wanted to talk about that real quick. For you flight instructors out there, you remember the FOI, the levels of learning that everybody loved learning about so much. But I want to draw your attention to the 4 levels of rote learning, the understanding level, the application level, and the correlation level. Rote learning would be like memorizing a list of 10 items and just regurgitating that information back, okay? We don't really like to test there because it doesn't show us that you've synthesized that information and you can use it from a practical standpoint. Understanding is being able to recite back the information, but also recite it in such a way that shows that you understand a little bit deeper what you're talking about. Application is where you can take that now and apply it to a real world problem. And correlation is where we draw multiple ideas and synthesize them into the solution of one problem. So we're going to test at the understanding and application level, and we're going to go to the correlative level too. But you know, it's kind of like, I think of it like an ocean. Like the rote level is up on top and the correlative theory is down at the bottom. So we're going to be hovering in the ocean there. So don't just memorize lists. When you memorize them, when you learn this information, make sure that you can also apply it. Okay? I see a lot of application problems out there. So we're going to test at that application, that correlative level too. Kind of not all the way at the bottom of the ocean, but 2/3 of the way down. All right. Expectations. Safety and good judgment go a long way on a check ride. And good airmanship too. Just doing the little things out there that are going to keep you safe. Like before you start the motor, opening the window and yelling clear out the window. Making sure you're not going to hurt somebody when you start the airplane. All this kind of stuff gets noticed on check rides. And it's being done fairly well out there. I don't get a lot of problems with safety and good judgment, but just want to bring it up and let you know that it should be at the forefront of your mind when you're taking the check ride. Standards, again, not looking for perfection. The PTS isn't looking for perfection either. Just looking for consistently striving to stay within the standards. If you get outside the standards, correct back, fix your problems. One of my personal pet peeves as far as this goes is between maneuvers. Don't be sloppy between maneuvers. I see this a lot where maybe on a private check ride, we're going from a steep turn to maybe slow flight or something like that. And we're maintaining altitude and doing what we're supposed to be doing on the maneuver itself. But then as we're doing our clearing turns, the nose is coming up and we're losing and gaining altitude. Remember, those altitude standards apply to the whole flight. And definitely those times in between. It's really sloppy if between maneuvers you're just kind of all over the sky. So really focus on picking an altitude and staying at it between maneuvers. Know your reference materials. This is another pet peeve type thing. If you bring in an aim and I ask you a question and you're not sure of it, and you ask me, hey, can I look it up? And then you look it up and can't find it, that doesn't look really good. So spend some time with your aim beforehand. Spend some time, obviously, with the PTS beforehand. Make sure that you can use the materials that you bring in. Make sure you know the difference between Part 61 and Part 91. I get that a lot. I'll ask an operational question that's definitely in Part 91, and somebody will ask me, hey, can I look it up? And they go to Part 61. Well, right there, that tells me a lot, right? You haven't spent a lot of time with the reference materials, and you don't understand that Part 61 relates to certification of pilots and flight instructors and not operational type issues. Again, another one of my pet peeves on this topic is commercially produced study guides. Okay, those are great. Use them. By all means, use them. I would encourage you to. I've used them in my own career. I have them in my personal library at home, but don't use them to answer a question on a check ride. And what I mean by that is that is a commercial company's idea of what that answer is, or how to ask that question on an FAA check ride. It's not the FAA's, okay? So, that's like asking your buddy to answer that question for you on your check ride, in my opinion. It's not a reference book. It's a study guide. It's not the FAR AIM. So I think you all know the books that I'm talking about. And for me personally, when somebody pulls that out, it's a little suspect to me. I want to see you, if you're going to reference something on a check ride, I want to see you reference an FAA document, not a commercially produced guide from who knows who made it. So enough on that. All right, answering questions on check rides. We've all heard the acronym, probably KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And that's a great guide for taking FAA check rides. You want to be concise and to the point. You want to listen to the question that's asked of you and give just enough information to answer it. The problem with this one is, and I see this almost every day, is once you start adding on superfluous information, it's very easy to go down a road that I didn't intend to go down, okay? And trust me, if you go down that road, I'm going to follow right along with you, and we're going to start talking about whatever it is you brought up. Do you really want that on the check ride? Probably not, would be my guess. I mean, if you're sharp enough and you can answer those questions, that's something else entirely. But why open yourself up to that? I have a set amount of material in my plan of action, and it's all based on the practical test standards. So we're going to go through that, and we're going to cover everything that we're supposed to legally cover for the check ride. But, if you want to go down a different path by giving long-winded answers that add on a lot of extraneous information, I'll be right there with you. We'll go together. So, and the dreaded statement is, since you brought it up, let's talk about that. And you don't want to hear that. Probably don't need a lot of personal stories. I want to get to know all of you when we're taking check rides. However, a lot of examiners, myself included, we schedule very tightly, and we have 4.5 hour blocks to get most of these check rides done. I want to get to meet you. I want to know a little bit about you. But when you're answering the questions, try and keep it to the technical answer to the question that you've been asked, okay? When we're hanging out later or another day, you can tell me about the associated stories that go along with those technical issues that you had. However, on the check ride, what it does is it just kind of drags it out. I'll sit there and smile politely and listen, but what happens is we can actually get to a situation where we just flat out run out of time to do the check ride, and you might get a discontinuance that you didn't want because we don't have time anymore. So Also, when you're answering questions, this by far is probably the thing I see the most is you've studied really, really hard, and I get that, and I know you have, and you want to show me everything that you know. Again, when you start feeling like that, the test is designed so that I will definitely know how hard you studied. I'll be able to tell on each particular topic that we get to because you're answering my questions correctly. Don't give me a flood of information on a particular topic when all I asked you was this one little narrow path, okay? Believe me, it'll show that you studied hard, and it'll definitely come through just by giving the simplest answer to the question that you can. All right, and then probably the last topic I want to cover on answering questions on a check ride is if you don't know the answer, just tell me. If you try and make one up, I'm going to know immediately that you're trying to BS your way through it. Ask me if you can look it up. If it's something that we can let you look up, I'll give you a little bit of latitude on that. But then this kind of goes back to know your reference materials. Make sure you can actually look it up. I mentioned it earlier, but I get that a lot where, hey, can I use the reference material? And then not so much. So, all right. So we're almost through the preliminary topics here. Flying the plane, take command of the airplane. Don't look to the examiner for answers. This goes back to what I mentioned with the PTS. If you ask me something about standards or what do I do here, I'm just going to literally, I'm not trying to be coy. I'm just going to ask you, well, what does the PTS say? And we'll go from there. Also, with being in command of the airplane is don't let the airplane fly you, okay? If you see that you're off your altitude, if you see that the localizer needle is swinging to one side, the glide slope needle's moving up or down, fix it, right? Just fly the airplane, stay ahead of the airplane, and don't let it fly you. What else? Go-arounds, this applies more to VFR flights, but I'll just bring it up. Go-arounds on landings that we do on maybe commercial rides or private rides. A go-around is a required task from the PTS, but for some reason on check rides it seems to have become like a taboo, like, oh my God, I don't want to have to go around on a check ride. Well, you're required to show a go-around anyway. Go-arounds show good judgment. They show that, maybe you had a little wind shear, maybe got a little bumpy, your speed got off. And it just shows that you're looking out for the airplane, that, hey, I'm not afraid to go around if I have to. So maybe it doesn't apply a lot to instrument rides, but just definitely wanted to bring it up. One thing that examiners don't want to hear is an applicant say, well, I would have done blank, but I'm on a check ride. No, a check ride is a very much a real world flight, okay? Don't do anything different than you would do normally just because you're on a check ride. I can't think of a specific example, but you want to just really pretend that person isn't there. They're a fly on the wall. They're observing you, okay? You fly the airplane within the standards of the PTS, the way you've been trained, making good decisions, and you should be just fine. But don't do or do not do something based on you being on a check ride. Fly the way you've been trained, okay? Fly the PTS. All right. And the last thing on that is fly through your mistakes, fix them, and carry on. The examiner will let you know if whatever mistake you've made is disqualifying for that particular maneuver. You don't want to dwell on it. You just want to keep going, because it may very well be, it might feel big to you, like you've failed the check ride, and the examiner's saying, okay, well, that person got outside the standards a little bit on that, but they got back in, so they complied with the consistently staying within the standards, and it's absolutely fine to them. So what you don't want to do is then let that become, oh my God, I think I failed. Oh my God, did I fail? Fix your mistakes, fly through them, keep going until the examiner says otherwise. All right. So enough of that. Let's get into the problem topics on the IFR stuff. So, and again, I can't say it enough, but this is not all inclusive. It's a representation of things that I personally see on check rides that I do that are getting missed a lot out there. So, and it's not meant to supplant your CFII either. All right, I'll almost always ask the question, when is an IFR rating required? Okay, and an answer I got recently was when it's IFR out. That's not the answer I'm looking for. Okay, you want to be specific on this one. Any flight, obviously, conducted under IFR flight rules, you need an instrument rating for. Okay. In weather minimums, in controlled airspace, weather minimums less than VFR, sorry. Controlled airspace. Class Alpha. Special VFR at night. That's the answer I'm looking for. The one that gets missed by far the most is special VFR at night. Okay? But anyway, so any questions on that? Good. All right. All right, airworthiness. This is one of those topics. It's in the instrument rating PTS. We have to talk about it. And it really seems to be getting overlooked out there and not well understood. In airworthiness, I'm going to talk about aero again, back to the aero documents. You're still responsible to make sure that those documents are on board. Even though we've made it through our private ride, we still got to talk about it. We're going to talk about inspections that have to be done on the airplane. We're going to talk about instruments and equipment required for IFR flight, and we're going to talk about how to deal with broken items. So what I want to bring up on this is, as far as inspections, A1 tape. Most of you have seen this before, but of course it's the annual, 100-hour, if for hire, transponder every 24 calendar months, ELT. And remember, there's two components to the ELT. The unit itself, per 91207 Delta, has to be checked every 12 calendar months. Okay? But we also have to deal with the battery. Remember, the battery will have a useful life stamped on the side of it. We have to make sure, looking in the logbook, that the battery is within its shelf life too. Okay, and then this one, altimeter and pedostatic. Remember, is only required for IFR flight. All right. For some reason, that's not well understood out there. Because we're talking about IFR flight here, yeah. If we're going to go operate under IFR flight rules, for sure, the altimeter and the pedostatic system have to be checked every 24 calendar months. If we were just flying VFR, technically that check would not need to be done, because I think it's the very first line in the sentence. If operating under IFR, you have to do that. Okay. So there's A1 tape. That seems to be getting missed a little bit out there. Instruments and equipment required for IFR flight. Whatever acronym you use, RADCRAB or GrabCard or any of these, memorizing that is operating at the rote level, okay? May or may not ask you to list that out, but one thing I'll definitely ask you to do is utilize that information. And so I'll sit back and I'll say, hey, if the directional gyro were inoperative, can we make an IFR flight? So what that question does is that it requires you to know what grab card is and know the instruments and equipment on grab card. But it also requires you to utilize that and say, no, directional gyro is definitely part of grab card. Can't go without that one. So please make sure you know grab card or rad crab, however you remember it. The instruments and equipment required for IFR flight. Another thing to talk about here is FAR 91205 versus FAR 91213. FAR 91205 is instruments and equipment required for different phases of flight, and that's where grab card comes from. FAR 91213 talks about inoperative instruments and equipment, and those two FARs kind of go together. 91205 says, hey, we have to have these instruments and equipment. 91213 says, okay, well, if none of that stuff's broken, but we've got other broken items, here's how we deal with it, okay? So even though you're coming to an instrument ride and you feel like you've got through your private, and this is maybe more of a private question, you definitely need to know how to handle inoperative instruments and equipment. So I want to go through that because it's really missed out there. There's really 4 ways per the 91213. These are in no particular order either. But one is to deal with that piece of inoperative equipment under an MEL or a minimum equipment list. This you probably don't have in your light airplane at your flight school. What this is, it's an agreement between the operator of an aircraft and the FAA. And literally it's a document, and the Airbus, it's about this thick, and it weighs about 50 pounds, breaks your back trying to put it into the holder in the cockpit. But and it's got basically every piece of equipment on the airplane that can be inoperative. So whatever piece of inoperative equipment you're dealing with, let's say a nav light, okay? Well, nav lights aren't required for VFR day flights, all right? But if it's broken, it's still a piece of inoperative equipment on that airplane, so it still has to be dealt with. So if you had an MEL, you'd go through and it would say, yes or no, this can be broken. Here's how to deal with it. Here's the stipulations for operating the airplane with that broken, and off you go. That's one way. Number 2, or a second way, is the INOP sticker and deactivation. Deactivation. Okay? And this probably, I would say, is maybe the number 1, number 2 way that I see broken equipment dealt with in general aviation airplanes. We've got the piece of broken equipment. We put that inoperative sticker on it. But remember, we also have to make sure it's deactivated. Now, I get a lot on check rides. People forget that. They'll say the sticker. And then it comes up, well, do you have to deactivate it? Yes. Well, who can do that? Well, the FARs don't really say. So be careful on that one. The best bet is probably to defer to the mechanic at your school. There are some things that pilots can deactivate, but if you're out there, with screwdrivers and stuff trying to deactivate equipment, I think you ought to think twice about what you're doing and call the mechanic. A third possible way to deal with broken equipment is the INOP sticker and remove it. Okay? So INOP it and actually have that piece of broken equipment removed from the airplane. The one you have to remember about this is it's going to affect the weight and balance. So if you answer that way on the check ride, make sure you throw that in, that, hey, you're taking that equipment out. You're going to have to deal with it in the weight and balance down the road. And the fourth possible way from 91213 is a ferry permit. Okay? And this we get from the FSDO. And it's a one-time authorization for us to fly an airplane with a broken piece of equipment to a place where it can get fixed. And really what you're doing is you're entering into an agreement with the FAA, proving to them that you can make this flight safely. Typically where I've seen this one over the years has been when things that are required. So Maybe a piece of grab card equipment is inoperative. Remember, we can't put an in-op sticker on a piece of grab card equipment, right? We can't in-op that DG. We can't in-op that generator, that rate of turn indicator. We have to have that stuff per 91205. So for things of that nature, the ferry permit might be the only way to get it somewhere where you can get it fixed. All right. So enough, that's kind of airworthiness topics. Moving on, weather. And by far the biggest one I see is please make sure that you can read a METAR. Please make sure you can read a TAF. Okay? If you've got ForeFlight and you've got the iPad, or even if you don't, you can just go online and Google METAR and TAF codes, and they'll come up, and you can learn what they mean. By far the biggest problem I see with METARs and TAFs is the date-time code. People tend to get the METAR a little bit better because it's going to have like, if today being the 16th, it'll say 1-6, well, it'll say METAR over here, and it'll say 1-6, and then it'll give the Zulu time that it was issued. So, I don't know, let's just say 2350, and then it'll go into the weather description there. Remember, date, time issued, okay? And then the weather. The TAF is a little bit different, and people get really confused. The TAF will have the same date, time of issue code, but then it's going to have, it'll look like this, and then it'll have the TAF out here, okay? People get confused. I see a lot of people on instrument rides not understanding that what this is saying is that this TAF was issued on the 16th at this Zulu time. It's valid from the 16th at 2000 Zulu to the 17th at 2000 Zulu, okay? So when I get to reading METARs and TAFs in check rides, this is definitely a problem area. And then you're going to get down to the from portion. Okay? And this isn't well understood either. So this would be considered the main body of the TAF. It's very general. It covers a large, usually 24-hour time span here. Down here is where we get more specific, and we start breaking that large, 24-hour period of time down into smaller segments, okay? And that's what that means, from the 17th at 0100, on with the TAF. And you'll see a lot of them, right? Another one down here, 17th at 0300, okay? Now I'm just making all this up, but it's going to look like this. And along with this, when you're utilizing the 1-2-3 rule to determine whether or not you need an alternate, in other words, an hour before your proposed arrival time to an hour after your proposed arrival time, 2,000-foot ceiling, 3 miles visibility, you got to work that in here, right? You got to see where that fits in there and use the correct information, okay? So practice that a few times before you come to the check ride. Make sure you're good with that. Make sure you can read a basic TAF and METAR. By all means, make sure that you know the descriptors and what they mean. BKN is a broken layer. SCT is a scattered layer. OVC is overcast. Know, that SN equals snow. Some of the harder ones, BR equals mist. There's commercially produced stuff out there that'll help you remember, what these mean. BR, for me, I always remembered because it's baby rain, mist. So that always stuck in my head. But you're responsible to know all the information in that TAF and be able to decipher it. Please, please, please don't think that I'm going to let you come in, use ForeFlight, and go down to the decoded portion under the TAF. That's not what the PTS says. So you got to be able to read that METAR and you got to be able to read that TAF. All right. So And again, there's plenty of other things I could ask about weather, right? But like I said, these are the common areas that I see getting missed out there. All right, next topic is systems on your aircraft. And we'll talk about steam gauge and we'll talk about G1000 here real quick. So does anyone not know what I mean when I say steam gauge? Everybody knows. Okay. All right. So steam gauge, again, a lot of things I could ask you, but this is by far the most commonly missed one, is we have to talk about instruments. Remember, at IFR, when you're in the soup, that's your window to the world. That's all you have to determine the attitude of the airplane, to fly the airplane with. So you need to be able to correctly interpret what they're telling you, not only when they're working properly, but when they're not working properly too. A huge part of instrument training should be talking about how to determine if such and such an instrument is not reacting properly. And I bring this up because I see that missed a lot out there. We focus so much on the nuts and bolts of IFR flying, tracking a localizer, understanding how to shoot approaches, understanding lost comm regulations, all this stuff, that this particular topic of really knowing what the instruments are telling us kind of gets lost. So by far, the most common one is pedostatic issues. And what I'll always ask is, well, let me just draw it. So imagine that I come over here and I pull that airspeed indicator out. I'm turning it sideways on the board and kind of drawing it from the side. So, oops, that was horrible. So it might look, that's too long. Might look something like that, right? And over here's the face of it. Okay. Remember, we have two inputs to the airspeed indicator. Inside, we have a diaphragm. Hooked up to that diaphragm is linkage that goes to the little pointer on the front of the instrument. Okay? Input number one is our pitot tube. Okay? So we'll draw that out there. And we'll put a little drain hole on it, back on the elbow. Input number two is our static source. Okay. So what we're definitely going to talk about on your instrument check ride is what happens when these various sources get plugged or frozen over with ice, or a bug flies in them, or you take a bird strike. Something plugs this up so it's not reading right anymore. Okay? So let's talk about the first one I'll ask you is let's say you're flying in the clouds and you forget to turn your pitot heat on and you run into some ice. And now this guy clogs up right here. So we're no longer getting that ram air input. Okay? In scenario number one, we're going to say that the drain hole is still open. Does anyone not know what I mean by the drain hole on the pitot tube? Okay. All right. So let's look at what we've got here now. We lost our ram air pressure. And let me back up real quick. Before I block that, let's make sure everybody understands the reason we're hooking up the static source on the other side of this diaphragm. Because when we collect that pitot information, we move that pitot tube through the air, not only are we measuring the ram air pressure by virtue of us moving through that fluid, but we're also gathering the static air pressure too. Okay? So pitot really becomes the ram plus the static. Okay? Well, we don't care about the static. We just want to know the ram pressure so that we know our indicated airspeed as we move through the air. So mechanically or mathematically, we want to X that out of the equation. Well, we do that by just balancing the other side of this expandable diaphragm in there so that mechanically this static pressure is pushing in, this static pressure is pushing in, and they cancel each other out. And we just read the ram pressure. Everybody cool with that? Okay. All right, so now let's block that pitot tube with ice. We'll leave the drain hole open and the static ports open too. Well, what do we have now? Coming in here, are we getting any ram pressure? No. What pressure are we getting through there? No, we're sensing a pressure through it. Static, right? So what do we have in that case? We have static, duking it out with static. What does the airspeed indicator read? 0. Exactly. Okay? All right. Scenario number 2 that I'll ask on a check ride is, okay, pitot tube and drain hole iced up. Okay? So we were flying along, and let's use really silly numbers that make it easy to understand. But let's say that we were doing, here's the front, and here's 0, and here's 100 knots indicated. So we're doing 100 knots. Okay? And let's say that to register 100 knots, it took 100 psi of pressure over here. Okay? Just made up numbers to make it easy. So that 100 psi, remember, consisted of the ram pressure plus the static pressure was being fed to that side of the diaphragm. And let's say of that 100 psi, that 10 of it was static. Okay? So that would mean the ram here equaled 90 plus the 10 gave you the 100. Now we've got 10 psi over here. And that subtracted out just happens to equal 100 knots indicated on this airspeed indicator. But we blocked this now. This froze up with ice. So what did we do? We trapped that 100 psi, didn't we? Okay? So assuming we're in level unaccelerated flight, this thing freezes up, but we haven't changed anything yet. We haven't accelerated or decelerated. We haven't gone up or down. Is this instrument still reading correctly? Sure, it is. Yeah, in theory, because we haven't changed anything, so we've still got that 100 psi in there. But now let's climb up a little bit. Let's climb up several thousand feet and see what's going to happen. Okay, we go up. What's going to happen to this number? Goes down, doesn't it? So let's say that goes down to 5. What's going to happen to this number? That goes up because it's blocked. Yeah, it stays the same. So what happened now? We got, instead of a 90 psi differential, we got a 95 psi differential, right? So this goes up. The complete opposite of what we would expect as pilots who are used to flying an airplane with operative instruments. We know that if we leave the power where it is and we pull back on the yoke, we increase the pitch attitude. If we've got excess power available, A, the airplane's going to climb, but B, the airspeed's going to drop off, isn't it? If you're in the soup, this has happened to you, okay? You climb and you see the airspeed increasing. What's that going to do to, that's hard to process. Okay, I'll tell you right now. Not this exact scenario, but I've had stuff like that happen. Because that, in your mind, is screaming, that should be going down. So I bring this up because it's crucial that you've thought through this during your training beforehand so that you can diagnose that problem when it actually occurs in flight. Okay? All right, so that's the pitot-static steam gauge thing. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. And that's just, that's actually 2 examples. There's other questions I could ask, but that by far is the most missed. Steam gauge pilots, please know vacuum instruments versus electric instruments versus pitot-static instruments. Okay, there's only 6 of them, so it's not that hard to remember. We all know that flying high to low, look out below, right? From an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure can cause it, if we don't adjust the altimeter, can cause it to read higher than we actually are. Remember, write this down in the AIM. Chapter 7-2-3 is a chart in there that shows you altimeter compensations for how cold affects the altimeter too. We fly in the Rocky Mountains. It obviously gets very cold here. gets really cold in the mountains up in North Dakota, it's well within the realm of possibility that you guys could not only have to deal with these pressure changes to your altimeter, but also the temperature changes. And that's not super well understood out there. But if you go to that chart, it'll clear it right up. And it's this, the good news is it's the same little adage, high to low, look out below. So if you go from a high temp to a very cold temp, it can cause your altimeter to read higher than you actually are. And quite significantly too. You'll be surprised when you look at that chart. All right, G1000 pilots. Please know, don't come to your instrument check ride and not know what the AHRS is or the ADC. I've had that happen more than you will know. The AHRS, Attitude Heading Reference System. I'm not asking you to build it. I'm asking you to know what it is, which instrumentation it supplies on your glass panel, and what you lose when it conks out. Okay? It's like knowing when your pedostatic system is frozen over. Same thing. What am I going to lose when that AHRS unit, when a little puff of smoke comes out of it, and what do I not have anymore? What do I not have anymore when the air data computer, the ADC, fails? So make sure you know that. And by far, the most misunderstood portion of the instrument ride as far as G1000 equipment is understanding the standby battery system. So let's just talk about that real quick. And the answer that I'm looking for. Typically what I'll do is I'll walk you through a hierarchy and I'll say, okay, we're in flight, everything's working properly, alternator's going, the battery's good, standby battery's powered, and then we'll walk it down. We'll say, okay, the alternator failed. Well, I want you to know what you're looking for to indicate that an alternator has failed. On the G1000, you've got warning systems, but you've also got the EIS system, right? And understanding that when you see 28 volts drop to 24 volts on there, you're receiving input from the battery, most likely, unless something really weird has happened to the alternator. So make sure you understand that. And then we'll talk about what systems you have available then. What's going to be working? You need to know that. You're flying this really advanced airplane. Part of the price you pay for that is understanding the levels of failure that you could possibly see in doing that. So please make sure you know, hey, if the alternator fails and I get down to the main battery, do I have all my instrumentation? Yeah. Can I still power the lights? Can I power the radios? Yeah. Can I power the flaps? You bet. Okay. But now let's take it down another level and let's get down to the standby battery. And this is where it gets a little trickier, because now we start losing a whole bunch of stuff on the airplane that worked with the main battery working, but does not work with the standby battery. The answer I'm looking for when I ask that, and I didn't pre-study, so I hope I get them all, but there's, I believe 7 per the POH, 7 items that you have left. You have the PFD, the primary flight display, i.e. the screen directly in front of the left seat, okay? You have the AHRS, okay? So we're going to still be able to power the quote-unquote gyroscopic presentations on that PFD. You have the ADC, okay? We're still going to get good pedostatic information to the instruments on the PFD. All right, you have COM1. Okay, we're still going to be able to talk. You have NAV1. We're still going to be able to navigate raw data off of a VOR. Okay. Okay. You have the standby instrument lights. Okay. So if all else fails and that screen fails something, you still have lighting available for those very basic lights or instrumentation down at the bottom to be able to fly the airplane. And the last thing you have is the standby bus voltmeter. And what they're saying here is, might be nice to know when that voltage starts dropping off, because guess what? When that one goes, now we have our compass, right? So anyway, that's the answer I'm looking for. Okay, it's well within the realm of what you should know as an instrument pilot. If you're going to be flying that G1000, you need to know what you're going to have left so that you can plan accordingly. Okay? All right. Okay. Any problems with that? All right. I see a few people came in late, and let me just reiterate, what this is not is an all-inclusive ground school. What it is just to talk about real common problem areas on the instrument check ride. So, all right. Next thing I wanted to talk about is alternates. And let's just quantify that to destination alternates. Okay? i.e., the 1, 2, 3 rule seems to be pretty well understood. I mean, I get the odd person who transposes the 2 and the 3 and tells me it's a 3,000-foot ceiling and 2 miles visibility, which it's not, but you know. But all in all, folks understand that. This kind of ties back to a couple topics ago, but as far as the 1, 2, 3 rule, what people have problems with on that is figuring out where that lies in the TAF and how to determine, well, which line of this TAF code applies to me. It could actually be more than one, right? If it's a very narrow window in the TAF, that 1 hour before to 1 hour after might overlap 1 or 2 so that you have 2 different lines of TAF that apply to you. Does anyone not know what the 1, 2, 3 rule is? Okay. All right. So this 1, 2, 3 rule, good. But what I'm talking about here is alternate minimums. So we've applied the 1, 2, 3 rule. So let's make a scenario. Let's say we're going to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Okay? We've applied the 1, 2, 3 rule. Cheyenne failed it. In other words, between that 1 hour before, 1 hour after window, the ceiling was going to be below 2,000 or the visibility below 3 statute miles. So now we have to start coming up with an alternate. This is where it gets really dicey on IFR check rides. We've got standard alternate weather minimums. For a precision approach, we have to have at least a 600-foot ceiling and at least 2 statute miles visibility. For a non-precision approach, we have to have at least an 800-foot ceiling and 2 statute miles visibility. Okay? So before we get into non-standard alternate minimums, which are a little sketchy, let's look at what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the planning phase of the flight. Okay? This is where we're sitting down before we even go. We're figuring out things like our fuel. You know, we have to be able to get to the destination, to the alternate, plus 45 minutes. We're looking at, do we need an alternate? We're applying the 1, 2, 3 rule, okay? If we need an alternate, this is planning stuff, okay? This is what the FAA says, hey, we want to make sure that the weather's a little bit better than what you're going to need for planning these as an alternate. Because if you've gotten to the point where you're actually flying to this alternate, that meant the weather was worse than anticipated at your primary destination. Goes to figure it could be worse than anticipated at your alternate destination. So that's kind of the theory behind it. So we're applying these from a pre-flight planning standpoint. Well, one thing that we have to look at, I'll always ask this, I'll always ask standard alternate mins, and then I'll pull out a plate for, let's say, FNL. Okay, and it's got, you know, all the minimums, and it's got the profile view and the plan view and all that. And then up at the top, up here in the corner, it could have a little triangle with an A in it. Okay? if you see that for the airport that you're going to, what it's saying is that for one or more approaches or one or more runways at that airport, these standard alternate minimums may or may not apply, okay? So if you see that A, and you're thinking of let's say we want to go to Cheyenne, but we're thinking of using Fort Collins Loveland as our alternate, and we look and we see that it's got that A, now we have to investigate a little bit farther. We have to go to the front of the TERP's procedure manual, and it actually has a picture of that A up there, and it has alternate weather minimums as the title. And then we have to go to Fort Collins, and we have to go through the list and see if these non-standard alternate minimums apply to the approach that we're predicating this alternate on, okay? It could very well be, let's say this is the ILS 33, okay? And I'm making this up, but it could very well be that, this approach has non-standard alternate weather minimums, whereas another approach there uses standard alternate minimums. Could be that. Yeah, Gary? Okay. Before you need to change tapes? Okay. All right. Please make sure that you can identify whether A, the alternate that you're thinking of using uses standard alternate minimums, whether it uses non-standard alternate minimums, or the most often missed, it's not authorized for use as an alternate. That will have the A with the NA after it. Okay, that gets missed out there a lot. That means flat out, I cannot use, let's back up. What does it mean? It means not only can I cannot use this approach at this airport, okay? It doesn't mean that, specifically that FNL can't be used as an alternate. There may be another approach there that I can use as an alternate, but I just need to go look. It means that this particular approach at this particular airport is not available to be filed as an alternate. Does that make sense? Does anyone not understand that? Okay. All right. So they're planning only. I mentioned that earlier. And then one other thing to talk about is probably one of the most missed questions, IFR, is can I use an airport for an alternate that doesn't have an instrument approach procedure? And that gets missed all the time. The answer is yes, I can. But remember, the weather has to be VFR such that I can go from the MEA through the approach and landing segment all the way to landing in visual conditions, VFR conditions. And then I absolutely could use an airport as an alternate that did not have an approach. Cool? All right, so we finished up on alternates on that. Next topic I'd like to go over, again, that proves to be kind of a problem out there on check rides, is IFR departure procedures. The way I'll ask this typically is to ask for what are the different types of procedures out there to depart safely under IFR. Really what I'm looking for is DPs, used to be called SIDs, used to be standard instrument departures, and they're actually referred to just as departure procedures now, or DPs, or ODPs, obstacle departure procedures. So let's talk about the difference between that. A DP, you need to understand this, in order to fly a DP under IFR, it has to be assigned any IFR clearance from ATC, okay? We can't just decide to fly that DP. If we're going to fly it, we need to at least possess the textual description of it. Don't need the picture necessarily, but we at least have to have the verbiage that tells us depart, fly such and such a radial. You guys have seen them. So we do have to be cleared to fly that DP versus the ODP. The ODP, the obstacle departure procedure, does not require a specific clearance from ATC to fly this. ATC is expecting that if we're departing from an outlying airport, an airport where the control tower is closed, an airport where they don't have radar coverage, they're expecting that, unless it's VMC out and we can visually avoid terrain and obstacles, they're expecting that we're going to fly this obstacle departure procedure. No additional clearance required to fly that one. So let's get into most commonly missed topics with this. Let's go back to that plate, and we'll just stay here at FNL. And let's just say this at ILS 33. We got the plan view, we got the minimums. Okay. Like we were looking for the little A before, what we're looking for departure is the inverse triangle with the T in it. Okay? This is widely misunderstood what the T means. The T not only denotes that there's possibly non-standard takeoff minimums, but if you read the title of it, it's and takeoff minimums and obstacle departure procedures. So I'll always ask the question, I'll say, hey, what does that little T mean? And 90% of the time the answer I get is, oh, that means that there's takeoff minimums for that airport. Well, that's correct, but it's only part of the answer. And the other part of the answer is and there may be an obstacle departure procedure in there for that particular runway too. All right. So we see the T, we've got the DP. DP would be like the Yellowstone 1 out of Denver, right? We have to get cleared to fly it. If you look at Fort Collins-Loveland, it does indeed have an obstacle departure procedure. So let's talk about when we're going to fly that. That's not well understood out there either. Like I said, we don't need a clearance to fly it, but we're going to fly that. That is a tool that we have as IFR pilots to keep ourselves safe when we are the only ones who, at that point in time, can be responsible for our terrain and obstruction clearance, right? ATC, for whatever reason, can't do it. Lack of radar, like I said before. My mind went blank, sorry. But we're responsible for our terrain avoidance. So the way I'll ask this question on check rides is I'll say, okay, we're here at Fort Collins-Loveland. You want to depart IFR. Is there a tower? Most people say no, there's not a tower, which is correct. And I say, okay, well, it's pretty solid IFR. Let's say it's a 200-foot overcast and it's a mile visibility. Obviously, we're not going to depart VFR with those weather conditions. So I'll say, what exactly do we do? You've got your clearance in hand. You got it over the clearance delivery frequency, or you called on the phone, or called it flight service, but somehow you got yourself an ATC clearance. It came with a void time, right? Because ATC needs to protect that airspace for you to depart. And this is exactly the way I'll ask the question. I'll say, there you are, you're lined up at the end of the runway. You're ready to go to take off power. What do you do immediately after you rotate? And almost, I would say 50% of the people I test get a deer in the headlights look. And they say, well, what do you mean? I fly the heading ATC told me. ATC's not there. There's no tower, there's no radar. Nobody's watching out for you. You are providing your own terrain and obstruction clearance. Well, the answer there is, do I have the ODP? And in this particular case, the answer is yes. You do have that obstacle departure procedure, okay? So you need to understand what that T is telling you, okay? Could be takeoff minimums, or it could be the ODP. Well, why do ODPs get published, okay, or get constructed for an airport? And basically, the FAA goes out and looks at a 40-to-1 slope, just a plane off the end of that runway. And if obstacles protrude through it, they've got to do one of two things. They've got to either up the takeoff minimums, which you need to understand for Part 91 or 00. That's not a real good idea, but that's what they are. They've either got to up those minimums, or they've got to create a procedure that you can fly that will keep you from avoiding, or will help you avoid that terrain or obstruction, whatever that obstacle is that penetrates that 40-to-1 plane. You gotta see or you have to be able to climb and perform in such a way that you'll avoid that. Remember, the basic climb gradient for IFR flight is 200 feet per nautical mile. So when things get built, okay, i.e. climb gradients or crossing restrictions at fixes, what's going on is the 200 foot per nautical mile climb gradient has obstacles protruding through it. So on takeoff minimums, you might see where it says, hey, if you're taking off on runway 33, you need to be VMC with 2 miles visibility to 600 feet AGL or something like that. And you need to understand as IFR pilots or IFR applicants that that's telling me, hey, there's some kind of obstacle out there that I need to see and avoid, okay? Or if I can't avoid it, I develop an ODP and I fly that when I'm IMC. So the whole point of this is not just to know what the T means, but to be able to go to the front of the TERPS manual, the instrument publication, find that procedure for that particular airport and apply it. I get a lot where people know what the T is, they go look at it, but then when I ask them to read the procedure, they have no idea what it means, okay? Let's look at a couple of common mistakes there. And Fort Collins-Levelland is a great example. I test it so much, I basically have it memorized. So if you're departing runway 33 at Fort Collins-Levelland, okay? Basically what it tells you is it reads like this. It says, climb on a heading clockwise from, I think it's 323, clockwise to, I think it's 148. Okay, so that's what it says. Climb on a heading clockwise from 323 to 148. All others, turn right and intercept, I think it's the gill, I think it's the 122 or 123. Obviously, this is not for navigation purposes, this is for training. Or two, I think it's a radial that comes out like this off a gill. But it basically tells you to intercept that, to turn right, intercept that radial, track inbound to the gill VOR, and then I can't remember what the hold is, but there's a hold there. And climb in that holding pattern until you reach a certain altitude and then proceed on course. Where people get mixed up on this is, the first place is, on check rides, is the very first part where it says, climb on a heading 323 to 148. Well, to me, it actually reads a little bit off from what it's trying to say. What it's trying to say is that if you're on your course, the course to wherever you're going lies between this 323 CW. I get a lot of people who don't know what CW means. CW means clockwise. CCW would be counterclockwise, although that's not in this particular ODP. If your course lies in there, what they're saying is as long as you can climb at that 200 feet per nautical mile, you're going to stay above the obstacles that lie within that, and you can safely just climb on course and off you go, okay? But what it's saying, because what do we have over here? Rocky Mountains, right? All others make the right turn, join the radial, go in, climb, and then go, okay? So you need to understand the basics of what it's telling you there, because it's saving your life. Because if you try and just turn off of there and go, 200 feet per nautical mile ain't gonna cut it, and you're gonna squash into the Rocky Mountains, right? Okay. And the other thing that gets missed on this particular ODP and others too is in the wording where it says 323 from DER. I challenge you to find the DER VOR anywhere in the state of Colorado or Wyoming. I don't even know if there really is a DER VOR. DER stands for departure end of runway. Okay? I get so many people telling me, well, I got to find the radial 323 from this DER VOR. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go grab a soda. Let me know when you find that radial. Good luck with that one. Whole point being, please take the time to read a couple of these before your check ride. Not only read them, but ask yourself, apply it. Remember, we're testing at that application understanding level. Apply it and say, well, what is it telling me? What if I was really the guy on a moonless night sitting in that airplane, first time, gonna fly IFR, oh God, what do I do, I mean, imagine yourself being in that position and asking yourself, hey man, do I trust myself to not do the wrong thing and turn and fly into a mountain? Do I understand what this is telling me? If you can answer yes after looking at a couple, 2, 3 of these, and there's one here at BJC, there's one at Fort Love, they're all over the place, okay? Then you're probably on your way to passing your check ride. All right, cool. Any questions with all that? Okay, that definitely gets missed a lot on check rides. All right, just a few more topics here. Airspace. I know it seems like a private thing. You got to know it for your commercial license, but you're still responsible for airspace on your IFR ride. Please don't come to your IFR ride and not have looked at the airspace chart since your private ride. It's fair game. You need to know, you need to know if you're in controlled airspace. Where does uncontrolled airspace begin? You need to know these things, especially surface-based Class E, right? Because back to the very first question I asked, when do we need an instrument rating? In controlled airspace, in weather minimums less than that for VFR, right? So we really shouldn't be operating in uncontrolled airspace below those weather minimums. So you need to know where it exists. All right, next topic, problem topic. Minimum crossing altitudes versus minimum reception altitudes, okay? Please have looked at a couple of these. The one that around here that's really good to go to is Allen intersection. It's just up here. If you look just a little bit northwest of Denver, you'll see it. But it's got not only the minimum crossing, but it's got the minimum reception as well. Okay, take a look at this. It's a little confusing. The data block for it is huge. I think it has MRA 16,000. Then it'll say Northwest Victor 85, I think it is, 15.4. And then it'll have a whole bunch of minimum turning altitudes down here. And it's a good one to test because it looks really imposing, that data block, okay? But you just need to understand a couple of things about this. One, what the minimum reception altitude is for, okay? And that's fairly self-explanatory. I have to be that high to guarantee that I'll receive the navigation signal from the VOR on which that airway is predicated, okay? This one's a little bit trickier because it won't come right out and say MCA there. Okay, it doesn't have that. This one has MRA, so that's a little bit easier. I see a lot of people get confused on this question, okay? On this particular, I'm just going to make a fake one, but it's real close to the real one, okay? On this particular, I think it's got a 16,000 foot MEA over here and 13.5 over here, okay? And it's got a minimum crossing altitude. This is Victor 85, okay? So make sure you can look at these data blocks and be able to identify which is the MRA, which is the crossing. This one has minimum turning, and know what it's telling you. In this case, in the example I've drawn, it's saying that if you're northwest bound on Victor 85, the minimum crossing altitude at Allen intersection is 15.4, okay? Here's what gets missed a lot on check rides on this, is folks don't understand when we would actually apply this and how we would deal with this. Remember, if everything's hunky-dory, your radio's working, ATC's radar's working, okay, they're taking responsibility for your terrain clearance here. This really gets down to when we lose our communications, right? And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But when we have to start deciphering what altitude to fly the airplane at, okay? And it very well may be that the highest of the particular altitudes on this segment is 13.5, but we're going to cross this and go to 16, okay? Or have to get to this 16,000 foot MEA on this side. You need to understand that this only applies if I'm northwestbound on Victor 85, and that I have to begin my climb so as to cross this fix at that minimum crossing altitude. Okay? Now, one thing I'll ask is I'll take that away and make sure that you understand this. What if there's not a minimum crossing altitude there? In the same scenario, I'm lost comms, I'm operating at 13.5. I notice that I've got the little perpendicular bars here which tell me MEA change, right? I've got those bars, so I go, there's an MEA change. I'm at 13.5. I need to climb to 16. This is not well understood. Where do I start that climb? Before, with the MCA, it was easy. I had to start it so as to cross that at that MCA. But here, I start my climb at the fix. That's exactly what the AIM says, okay? And then I get a lot of blank stares, like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Let's go into why it makes sense real quick. Now we're looking at the airspace from the side. Okay, here we're looking down on it. Now we're going to take this view. So here's Victor 85, this portion here, okay, at 13.5. Here's this intersection, okay, going up to 16,000 foot MEA over here. Well, remember how we talked about 200 feet per nautical mile? And I like to think of it as a silly, easy way to conceptualize this is imagine a construction worker. And instead of building houses, he or she's building airspace, okay? And when they build it, just like when they build your house, they have the code rules that they have to build your house to. It's the same thing with this. They've got the code rules that they've got to build that airspace to. And the main rule is the 200 foot per nautical mile climb gradient, right? So let's look at that. So what they're saying here is this airspace construction worker came out and he went, okay, well, we'll lay out that Victor 85 there, and the boss told me to make the MEA there at 13,500. And we've got this, we're calling it Allen intersection here. And beyond that, the boss told me that to lay that out, but the MEA is 16,000. Now we go back and we apply the rule from the AIM that says, hey, without a minimum crossing altitude, begin that climb to the next higher altitude at the fix. Here's what's going on. When they laid that out, they said, okay, 200 feet per nautical mile, let's run that up and see what it looks like, okay? So I'm Mr. Airspace Construction guy, and I measured that out, and I go, yep, that's 200 feet per nautical mile. Stick it on there. So that gets rid of that for our purposes of the climb. And now my boss comes back and goes, good job, you built it right. And the boss comes and he says, is anything poking up in there? Is there any mountain that pokes through that plane? Or it doesn't actually have to poke through it. It just has to come within a certain distance of that plane. But for our purposes, to make it easy, let's say it pokes through it, right? So the boss comes and goes, oh man, we got a problem here. We got this MEA, we got this MEA, we got the 200 feet per nautical mile, but we got an obstruction or a piece of terrain that's poking up through that. So if these people do what they're supposed to do, they're going to plant into the side of this mountain. So what the boss says is, hey, Mr. Airspace Construction Worker, get in your little tool bag there and give me a crossing altitude there. And so what the boss does is he takes that plane and he just starts raising it up until it clears this obstacle by the required amount to keep you safe. So he raises it up. It's still 200 feet per nautical mile plane. Okay, it's still that same angle. It's just raised up to account for that terrain. And now he comes over and he goes, okay, well, where's the bottom of that at this intersection? Well, in this case, it's at 15.4. Okay? and we run this over. And that's why you have crossing restrictions. And that it's, think of that silly airspace construction worker. It always worked for me. But that's how the game is played there. So do I want you to be able to explain it to that level? No. But you need to understand two things. One, if you have the crossing restriction, make darn sure you begin your climb so as to cross it here at that altitude, because at 200 feet per nautical mile, that's what you have to do to avoid that. And two, make sure you understand without a crossing restriction, we can just go ahead and start it right here, because what's going on there is the terrain was well below. And so the boss said, nope, we're good without that crossing restriction in this case, because the terrain is well below that 200 feet per nautical mile plane. Begin your climb there, and off you go. All right. Any questions about that? Yeah.
So if I have a minimum reception altitude for Allen, I want to be at the MRA before I get to Allen so that I can actually identify Allen, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay. MEA versus MoCA. Since we're on the topic, we'll just leave it here. Again, know how to identify the MEA versus the MoCA. And I'm just using fake numbers here. But write in FAR 91,175. Did I write it down? 91,177. Okay. Right in the FARs, it tells you this. And this is getting missed out there. But let's, instead of an intersection, let's make that a VOR. I'm just going to draw a circle for a VOR. And we'll just call it the ABC VOR. And over here is the DEF VOR. Okay. Most people can tell me that's an MEA. Most people can tell me that's a MoCA. But what they can't tell me is when can we actually utilize the MoCA, okay? Almost all of us know that the MEA guarantees us nav signal reception and terrain clearance. The MoCA, what is it? Does anyone know? What does it guarantee us? And?
Reception, but within 40 miles.
Not 40.
20.
22, right. 22 nautical miles. So really the only time that it becomes useful is in these areas here, okay? It's not really useful at assuming you're predicating your navigation on the VOR signal. It's not really useful in this interstitial area here because you're too low to receive this. But once you hit that magic 22 nautical mile mark, you can start using that MoCA, okay? So on a check ride, if you tell me you're going to operate over the MoCA over the entire length of this route, I'm going to look at you funny, and I'm going to ask you about FAR 91,177. And it's my understanding, I've had people ask me why over the years, and I asked, and this is the answer I got a long time ago, was that back before my time, or the old days, whatever, a lot of airports had VORs on them, right? And so instead of operating at the MEA all the way to that VOR, maybe what the MoCA allowed us to do was say, hey, now I can receive that. Let me go down, in this case, another 2,500 feet. I'm perfectly safe. I've got the terrain clearance, and see if I pop out of the clouds and I can just see the airport and land visually. And that's really what it kind of did. In our day and age, we're transitioning to almost all RNAV stuff or GPS, so it's not a huge deal, but still out there, you still need to know it. All right, position reports. All this takes is a minimum amount of practice on the ground before the check ride, but it seems to be getting overlooked. Okay, know how to make a position report. Know the information that's required. As IFR pilots, you will make position reports. I always use the IPTANE acronym. Okay, stands for ID. So my ID, so Cessna 1234 position. We're over DEF VOR, and we'll make That's ABC, DEF, and here's XYZ VOR. So Cessna 123 is over DEF VOR at time. So what is it? 0130 Zulu or 0230 Zulu. Altitude. Okay. ETA and name. Next fix. Name only of the next succeeding fix. So just practice a couple of these. I'll ask most people, and I get some wild answers to this one, but just 2-3 times practicing. You may have never really made one in the airplane, but just sit in your kitchen and practice, and you'll get it down. It's Cessna 123 over DEF VOR at 0230 Zulu, 10,000 feet. Expect ABC VOR at 0300 Zulu, XYZ next. Done. That's how to make a position report. All right, 3 more topics and we'll get you out of here. Back to those pet peeves, all examiners have them. Things that we see that we're just like, oh man, I can't believe you don't know that. And this is definitely one for me. Reports to ATC required at all times. I should say IFR reports to ATC at all times. 3 exclamation points. Okay? It's right name, you got to know it. Okay? This is information that you are required legally as an IFR pilot. When you filed that IFR flight plan and put your name on it, you said, hey, I have the rating, I know all the rules, and I'm going to comply with the rules. Well, this list is complying with it. These are things that ATC expects you to tell them whether or not they've asked you at all times, whether you're radar contact, whether you're not radar contact, whether you're over a compulsory reporting point, whether you're over a non-compulsory. So let's look at what they are. And I came up with an acronym for this one to help you out. And the acronym is stall mover. And I'll write it down. You got to kind of use your imagination on mover. But STALLMUUVA, stall mover. Okay? All right, let's just go through this real quick. This is missed badly on a lot of IFR check rides. And I definitely expect you to know it when I test you. The S is safety of flight information. And this is in no particular order. It just worked out well with the acronym. And I know there's another one out there, Comstraw, I think. And I've even seen another one, but this is the one I'm familiar with. Okay. If we run into anything safety of flight oriented, we're legally supposed to tell ATC. So if we start picking up moderate ice, severe turbulence, things of this nature, a big flock of geese that somebody could, let them know. T is time and altitude reaching a holding fix. Sounds pretty important to me. A, airspeed change of 10 knots or 5%, whichever is greater. And it's really true airspeed change, okay? Not indicated. True airspeed change. You get this one fairly often in jets. Maybe we're late, we're running late, I just want to get home. I'm like, go fast, and you bump your indicated, or I'm sorry, you bump your true airspeed up 40 knots. Technically, you're supposed to tell them, okay? L is loss of nav equipment. and degree to which your ability to operate in the IFR system is affected with that. You're supposed to tell them. Next L is leaving a holding fix. Okay. M is the big one. I see this missed a lot, and it always shocks me. We have to report our missed approach. First U is unable to climb or descend 500 feet per minute. You'll usually hear this called slow climb. And call up, hey, this is citation 1234, we're slow climb, we're heavy. And they'll tell you, oh man, I got traffic, that's going to conflict with you. Maintain flight level 370. You hear that every now and then out there. The second U is unforecast weather. V is vacating previously assigned altitude. And A, altitude change, VFR on top. I've only had a couple people get all these in 4 years of doing IFR rides. I've had some get none, stare at me like there's a list, okay? Please know this. Definitely if you're going with me. And then there's an addendum to this. So this is IFR reports to ATC at all times. The addendum gets missed even more than this, which is reports to be made when not in radar contact. Number one, I'll just put them up here so you can see. Number one is a revised ETA anytime an ETA that you've given is off by more than 3 minutes. So revised ETA when off by greater than 3 minutes. And let's take a quick look at what these mean. Let's say you're flying out over the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, there's hundreds of miles out there where Houston Center, where Merida Center down in Mexico, Havana Center, they don't have radar coverage. And they're basing their separation of traffic out over the Gulf on what you're telling them. When you make that position report, the reason you need to know that is because when you're telling them ETA to the next point, name only, A, it tells them, hey, this guy's on the route that I think he's on, and B, I know what time he or she thinks they're going to be there, and I can separate other traffic based on that, okay? Where this comes in is the Gulf's a great example. Tons of thunderstorms out there, right? It's Gulf of Mexico. Well, what if I have to come off that route? So I've made a position report at, let's say, XYZ VOR, or waypoint, because there's no VORs out there, but, and I've told them, hey, in 45 minutes, I'm going to be at this next one. They're basing their traffic separation off of that. And now I have a cell pop up at 12 o'clock, and I got to fly around it. And now I'm not going to get to DEF waypoint until 4 or 5 minutes after what I told them. Well, what if they've scheduled another airplane in that slot, right? So this is important stuff. All right, the second one, there's 3 of these. And again, these are reports when not in radar contact. These were reports at all times. These are not in radar contact. On a precision approach, when you're outer marker inbound. And the third one is on a non-precision approach, when you're FAF inbound. So if you hear those unmagical words, the magical words are radar contact, right, to an IFR pilot, because we can stop the position reporting, okay? So when you hear the non-magical words of, hey, I lost radar contact on you, report such and such an intersection, you're bound to report that outer marker inbound or that final approach fix inbound. And really what this is about, remember, if you're IFR in there, non-radar, he or she, the controller, can only let one airplane at a time in, okay? It's to help them plan out that next airplane coming in. Any questions about this? All right, almost done. All right, last couple topics, lost comms. Let's go through the rule and then I'll go through how I test it. The rule says if lost comms, IFR, if I lose them in VMC conditions, just land, right? Just find a place to land. Stay VMC and land. The rub comes in when we're IMC, right? Okay, IMC, the way I remember it, is we have two things to deal with. We have to deal with our altitude, so vertically, and our route, or laterally, okay? And again, I'm bringing this up not because I don't think it's, that I'm the only one who can teach it. I'm bringing it up because it gets missed a lot on IFR check rides. As far as altitude, the acronym is AMY. We fly the highest of last assigned altitude, minimum IFR, not MEA, minimum IFR, and altitude we were told to expect. Okay? Highest of these, okay, not the first one we come to. So back to that we had up here, if our assigned was, I don't know, let's say 14,000, and we were on that 13.5 segment, boom, we climbed to 14. But now we come up on that Allen intersection I had drawn up here where the MEA went up to 16. Guess what? We climbed to 16 because that's the highest of the last assigned, the minimum IFR, the altitude we were told to expect. The reason it's not MEA only applies to on a route, right? On a Victor Airway or a jet route. Minimum IFR, most of our time, well maybe not most, but a substantial portion of our en route time now in the RNAV area is spent off route, right? Direct to so-and-so. Well, what's the floor? What's that minimum IFR altitude we can operate at? In that case, it's usually going to be the Oroka, okay? So that's very different than the MEA. That's why, to be perfectly correct and to show really good understanding of this regulation, don't say MEA, tell me it's minimum IFR altitude. So the rest of this, it's the acronym for this whole lost comms reg is AMY from Avenue F. Okay, and Avenue F is, as far as the route, it's the assigned route, vector, expected, filed. Okay, so when we were dealing with the vertical aspect of this, we looked at the altitude and we said it's the highest of those. Okay, last assigned, min IFR, or altitude told to expect. When we look at the route, so it really doesn't matter what order we put those in. AMY just works because it's easy to remember. But it really matters what order we put these in. Because guess what? The route we fly is the first one we come to that we have. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we had the ABC VOR to the DEF VOR to the XYZ VOR. Okay? And let's say that that's where our destination. Well, if we're cleared that, you're cleared to the XYZ airport via ABC and DEF, and the radio fails on that, we go down and we say, hey, did I have an assigned route? You bet I did. It was this route here, that's what I fly. But what if I got just past ABC VOR and ATC said, hey, Cessna 123, fly heading 080 for 2 minutes because of traffic. okay? And now the radio fails there, okay? Well, I was taken off that assigned route. I was put on a vector for some reason, in this case, traffic. So now I go down and I say, do I have an assigned route? Nah, ATC took that away from me when they put that me on the vector. Am I on a vector? Yes. In this case, yes. So what do? Well, in this case, I know that in 2 minutes, I was going to get a clearance back. So in 2 minutes, I just re-intercept it myself, back on, and off I go, okay? If I don't have either of those, for whatever reason, okay, and it's fairly unlikely that you'll get to this point, but if I say, did I have an assigned VR or an assigned route? No. Was I on a vector? No. Did ATC tell me to expect something? Actually, that is fairly common. What am I saying? So let's put us back on that vector. Okay. ATC says, hey, Cessna 123, fly heading 080 for 2 minutes due to traffic. You read it back, you do it, poof, the radio fails. Okay. Oh, and ATC says, fly heading 080, expect XYZ in 2 minutes. That's what I meant to say. Okay, now the radio fails. Well, I don't have an assigned. I am on a vector, okay, but they told me to expect this. So that's what they're expecting me to do at the end of that 2 minutes. All right? You may say, well, vector comes before that. Well, if I was, as part of that vector, if I was told to expect this other thing, that's what I should do. I should come down and do that expect, and in 2 minutes just go direct to the XYZ VOR. And if I don't have any of that stuff, whatever I filed. Okay, you always have that, right? No matter what. Okay, now, what do? The way I'll ask this is, I want you to know the regulation, but I'll say, okay, it's snowing heavily at XYZ. ATC says, hey, I need you to hold over ABC for a couple minutes due to plowing operations at XYZ. Expect further clearance in 10 minutes. Okay, you're holding here, poof, the radio fails. One, when do we leave here? Okay, you need to know, wait for your EFC time. Okay, but where do we go? Okay, let's say we were going to fly our assigned route. We were back on that. We weren't on that vector. Okay, we get to DEF, but in a lot of cases, like here at Jeffco, right? The VOR is off half mile off the end of the field. I'll ask folks, where do I go? I get to XYZ VOR, what do I do next? And I get a kind of deer in headlights look. What we're going for there is that we have to get ourselves to a fix from which an approach begins, right? Could be an intermediate fix, could be an IAF, could be an initial approach fix, right? Somehow, we've got to look at the plates there. And this is where it gets murky. There's not a hard and fast rule that I can teach you. But what I can teach you as an examiner is take a look at the airports that we're dealing with around here or around your check ride and ask yourself these questions. Just sit at your kitchen table and say, if I'm inbound to Jeffco, okay, and in this scenario, and this is, we'll say BJC, and my radio fails, how am I going to get from that VOR to that point from which an approach begins, right? And you'll see in looking at it, you'll come up with some great questions, and you and your flight instructor will sit down and figure them out. Trust me, I can tell who's done that and who hasn't, okay? Because what I want you to do is think through the problem on the check ride and tell me, okay, well, there's a feeder route out here or whatever, you know? I had one yesterday where the guy had a great answer. We were doing a ride, and we were looking at Lamar, and there was just no, on an RNAV approach, there was no way to get from the VOR safely out to the initial approach fixes, which were RNAV fixes. There was no feeder routes. In fact, on the RNAV approach, it didn't even show the VOR on there. And you know what this guy told me? It was a great answer, I thought. He said, well, if this is the only approach I have, there's no feeder routes, I guess I'm going to operate at that minimum safe altitude. I'm going to utilize that and get myself directly to there. At least then I know that my terrain obstruction is provided. And I was like, man, that's a great answer. That's thinking outside the box, okay? Not really outside the box, Let's think like an IFR pilot. Okay, how do I keep myself safe? So please sit down and just spend a little bit of time with the material beforehand. All right, and the very last thing, IFR arrivals, and again, this is not all encompassing, but please know which minimums apply to you. Back when I got my instrument rating, it was a lot easier. You looked at an ILS chart and it had probably straight in minimums or circling minimums, or maybe or glide slope out mins. But now with all the RNAV, we've got LPV mins, we've got LNAV mins, we've got LNAV VNAV mins, and it gets really confusing which minimums apply to you. Again, look at the charts around your airport and make sure that you know what minimums you're using. I've seen people on instrument rides use LPV minimums in non-WAS aircraft. That's not a very good idea. It just shows that they don't know how to pick what minimums they're going to. So be careful with that. And the last thing, and this gets missed a lot, is I think it's FAR 91-175, lists the criteria that we have to comply with in order to descend below a decision height or a decision altitude or an MDA. Okay? And remember, 3 things. I have to have the prescribed flight visibility, not tower visibility, flight visibility. Okay? I have to be in a position where I can land in the touchdown zone using normal maneuvers and rate of descent. Normal, I'll just put normal maneuvers, but okay. And I have to have the runway environment in sight. Remember, there's a list of 10 or 11 things there. Touchdown zone lights, touchdown zone, runway and identifier lights, approach lights. Remember, though, we can only use the approach lights only down to 100 feet above. So, make sure you can tell me this. This gets missed a lot out there. And the last thing, in regards to landing in the touchdown zone, I'll almost always ask a VDP question. Okay? VDPs get missed a lot. So if here's the final approach fix. Okay, I'm coming down. Here's the missed approach point. Here's the runway. Okay, the VDP relates directly back to this regulation. Okay, because you've all seen it, VOR approach or whatever, where it dumps you off and just brings you right over the runway threshold, right? And it's usually, 300, 400, 500, 600 feet above the airport elevation. So if we're at 500 feet HAA, or height above airport, at that point, can we really comply with that? No, can't. What you can do is you can calculate on yourself, or you can use the VDP listed on a chart. That's what the VDP is for. I hear all kinds of answers to this one when I ask what a VDP is for. The most common answer I get is, if I'm visual, I can start descending then. Well, if you're visual, can you start descending back here? Okay. If you're visual, can you descend here? I mean, that's not a very good answer. What it relates to is it's saying, hey, we got to back you up a little bit here and give yourself time to lose that 500 feet in order to land in the touchdown zone or the first third of the runway. Okay? Does that make sense? Cool. That's all I had for problem topics. Does anyone have any questions? Did I say anything wrong? Sometimes I get going.
Just pretty sure for Part 91 you don't have touchdown zone, right? That's just you guys?
Yeah, but you do have to be able to land normal maneuvers. Yeah, maybe I did do that. That might be a 121 thing. Anyone have any questions? Anything to add? Okay, again, it's not all encompassing, but I hope it's been helpful. because these are the main topics that I see missed on IFR rides. There's plenty of other stuff you're responsible for that you need to know that I did not go over. But again, those areas that I didn't go over are typically areas I see most people getting correctly and not really stumbling on. These were more the stumbling blocks, so thanks.